Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attendance here today. Buenos días a todos y a todas y gracias por su participation hoy. Bonjour à tous et à toutes pour votre présence aujourd'hui dans ce panel. Today, we will take advantage of our guest, whom I will introduce in a few minutes, in order to have a conversation open and diverse about three things that all relate with how do we build ownership and knowledge exchange through the regional KICS hubs. The three main questions that we will be discussing today are, first, how do we use regional hubs to identify the needs, the priorities, and the demands from GPE countries, member countries, in order to gather evidence, knowledge, and research that may help through the policymaking process. Secondly, we will talk about how to connect research and evidence into those policymaking processes. How do we make sure that we transfer the right type of knowledge, what is needed? And finally, how do we facilitate peer-to-peer exchange and learning linked to these education system challenges in each country? Before we start, I want to indicate that for those that are watching us on the platform, that you have an option to find which language do you want to hear today. So you can hear it in French, English, or Spanish. There is a simultaneous translation going on, and you can select which one you want to join. Those elements that I have mentioned, identify needs, mobilize knowledge, and facilitate peer-to-peer exchange, are at the very core of what the Global Partnership for Education Knowledge Innovation Exchange program does. And we do that in partnership, of course, with IDRC, the International Development Research Center, and the Global Partnership for Education, but also with an ecosystem of local and global partners around the world. And the central part of this ecosystem is what is done by the 4 regional learning hubs that are here represented today. What we'll do now is that I will introduce very briefly a video, a 2-minute video that will help us to save a lot of time in order to understand what KICS is and what the hubs are and what they do. And after that, I will introduce our 4 panelists. So without further ado, maybe we can start by watching this short 2-minute video, and then we'll enter the conversation.
Can we improve education for children around the world at the same time? We can. By listening, sharing, and using evidence. That's what KICS does. KICS listens to what countries consider to be their principal education policy and programming challenges. KICS shares experiences of successful educational innovations between countries. And KICS uses evidence to generate a high impact on educational policy. So what is KICS? KICS is the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, the largest fund solely dedicated to bridging the knowledge gaps that undermine education systems in developing countries. KICS funds research at global and regional levels, but the fact that it is a learning exchange is what makes it special. The exchange brings together representatives of national education systems to share information, identify best practices, and guide regional priorities. So where does KICS do all this? KICS is global, connecting 70 low and middle income countries that are part of the Global Partnership for Education. But it's also local, based on local needs and expertise. 4 regional hubs are the core of the KICS design, acting as a primary mechanism for knowledge sharing. 2 separate hubs in Africa connect representatives from 40 countries. The EAP pulls together stakeholders from 21 countries in Asia Pacific, the Middle East and North Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And the hub in Latin America and the Caribbean groups 10 countries across the region. Regional learning partners manage each hub. They are key global and regional organizations in education, bringing with them technical, social, economic, and political capital. They all work for the same goal: share, systematize, and promote high-quality education around the world. And that's how KICS does it.
Thank you. We would like to start by inviting Julie Shorley. Julie Shorley is the Vice President of Strategy, Regions, and Policies at the International Development Research Center, and she will give some opening remarks to put the work that KICS and the hubs do in a sort of broader context of Canada's challenges and work in international development. Julie holds a master in peace studies and conflict resolution from the University of Ulster and has extensive experience in international development, including being the Canadian ambassador to Ivory Coast and Liberia before joining IDRC. So Julie, please pass your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Florencio, and hello, everyone. Greetings from Ottawa, Canada. It's a pleasure to be with you today representing the International Development Research Centre, IDRC. As part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts, IDRC champions and funds research and innovation with developing regions to drive global change. IDRC is delighted to work with KICS as a joint endeavour with the Global Partnership for Education. Since we started this effort in 2019, much progress has been made. 8 competitive calls, over 40 active research and scaling projects, and a network of regional hubs to connect research and action, the topic of the panel today, and some of the discussion Florencio has already mentioned, are all interlinked as part of this important endeavor. Investing in education is central to IDRC and a key part of our new 10-year strategy 2030, including the improvement of access to quality education from kindergarten to grade 10, particularly for girls. The work that we're doing with GPE is complementary to other research we're undertaking in areas such as skills building and gender in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. IDRC is also aligned with the broader Canadian commitment to support education in countries of the Global South and for the most vulnerable populations, which includes Canada's commitment to the GPE that will be pledged later this week. The core principles of the KICS program, supporting research, mobilizing evidence, and contributing to more informed policy-making processes, are also core principles at IDRC. So it's a natural fit, and we're really proud to be working together. Among the key knowledge gaps that have been identified by KICS in consultation with national representatives and addressed through research calls and hub activities include teacher professional development, adapting to policy and pedagogical changes due to COVID-19 restrictions, increasing access, coverage, and retention in the school system, especially for girls, persons with disabilities, and rural populations, strengthening learning assessment systems, and ensuring the coverage and quality of early childhood care and education. As Florencio mentioned in the introduction, I've had the opportunity to visit schools in many GPE-supported countries, which have included places like Madagascar, Kenya, Liberia, and Côte d'Ivoire. So I've seen firsthand how addressing these knowledge gaps and improving the delivery of education in each of these different contexts can have very tangible benefits to the quality education that young people receive. Regional hubs, like the ones we're discussing today, are a central part of this effort. Hubs act as knowledge brokers, connecting cross-country knowledge exchange and mobilizing, fostering collaboration among key national education stakeholders, and defining a comprehensive knowledge and innovation agenda directly built from needs and identified priorities of education systems in the Global South. At IDRC, we believe in building evidence in developing countries by local researchers, sharing knowledge with the research community and policymakers to inform local and global action, and mobilizing alliances to drive positive global change. We're thrilled to be working with GPE. It has the global reach that increases the impact of this shared vision. Through KICS and in collaboration with our regional partners, IDRC is learning how to innovate and become more effective at supporting capacity building and knowledge mobilization. Our regional partners are SUMA in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States in Latin America and the Caribbean, l'Institut de la Francophonie pour l'Éducation et la Formation in West Africa and Central Africa, UNICEF UNESCO and the African Union in Eastern, Southern, and Western Africa, and the Network for International Policies and Cooperation in Education and Training in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. The engagement with each of these partners has been rich, and we look forward to continued collaboration as we go forward. Thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you a productive discussion full of insights and cross-learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julie, for your words. And now I would like to introduce our three panelists that belong to those different hubs that we have mentioned. It's with us today, Natia Pidashvili. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, Natia. Natia is a master in international relations and has PhD in political science from the Georgian Academy of Science, Institute of Political Science. And she is, among other things, the KICS coordinator for Georgia and a very active member of our KICS community. Victoria Kisakye is a master in public health, PhD in education at Makerere University, and is a program officer with UNESCO ICBA, and is part of the Africa 19 Hub for English-speaking countries in East, South, and Southern and Central Africa. And she's joining us today from Addis Ababa. I didn't mention that Natia is joining us today from Tbilisi. And finally, there is Raul Chacon, sociology, a Master of Arts in Education from Concordia University, and is the coordinator for the KICS Hub for Latin America and the Caribbean, and he's joining today from Montreal. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I would like, as I said before, the idea today is to discuss three main topics. How do we capture the needs and the priorities from the countries? How do we mobilize knowledge that are relevant to those countries? And how do we facilitate engagement and peer-to-peer learning within members of the community within those different countries and regions? And I would like to start with a question that applies to all of us. So maybe each one can share with us some reflections about it. In terms of country priorities, in terms of capturing what is relevant for countries in terms of knowledge and evidence, what have you learned in terms of how to do, especially in those special times of COVID where so many restrictions apply to travel? How do you manage to capture those priorities? How do you manage to understand what the countries are demanding in terms of their needs for evidence and science and based knowledge as they move forward in their national country planning and policy making processes? Maybe we can start with Victoria, and then Natia, and then Raul, and then we'll be switching the order for the next round. Victoria, would you like to start?
Thank you very much, Florencio. Coming from the KICS Africa 19 Hub, and it's quite an interesting question. How do we capture the needs, the knowledge from the countries within the current context, which is quite interesting? We have done a lot of surveys, online surveys, to be able to capture this information because we want to focus on a demand-driven knowledge and exchange program, and also to ascertain that the needs of the stakeholders are addressed. We've learned that ministers of education, education officers from the Ministry of Education learn to learn from each other. They learn to learn from each other. So we also pick their innovations. We also pick their successes. We also pick some of the promising practices and then foster a platform for sharing this information that can be then used for others to learn from each other. But otherwise, we've held rapid assessments, we've held webinars, we've held quick surveys, pulse surveys, we've held communities of practices to make sure that we generate as much information as possible through online means. Over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. Natia, so the question applies also to you, but I just want to point out that you are standing from a very interesting and maybe a different standing point from compared with the other two participants, in the sense that you are not in charge of coordinating a regional hub, so you do not have to look at this sort of aggregated landscape, but rather you do something that is very, very valuable for us. Is that you are in direct contact with one country. You have probably a great sense of how do you do that on a country basis rather than an aggregated regional space as the hub. You are the connection between the countries and the hub. So please, Nadia, go ahead.
Thank you, Florencio. I first of all, thank you to give me a chance to be the part of and a panelist of this very interesting topic. And as you already mentioned, I'm working for KICS as a national coordinator, and it is really interesting and somehow the challenging journey that will contribute to the development of the innovations in the education system, not only my country, but the members of the KICS Hub country members. As a national coordinator, now I think that Hub adopting a very adaptive management approach of learning by doing, and adapting to the needs of each context and diverse region of Europe, Asia, and Pacific. You know, our hub covers a very diverse part of the world. And also we have somehow direct connection with the hub coordinators, and also we have monthly meetings. We are the national coordinators and our hub coordinators. We are discussing upcoming events, and we are sharing our knowledge and experience, how to organize webinars, learning cycles, or other activities. And we think and work to adopt some monitoring mechanism to improve the quality of our learning cycles, of implementation of other activities. Knowledge generation and exchange activities are contributing to building and strengthening of relationship and networks within countries also. We have a national country committee members at the national level, and we have a monthly meetings also. And as a national coordinator, I have a pleasure and somehow the responsibility to share the information about the upcoming activities, and also the activities are already implemented during the project. And it's somehow not only the way and mechanism of feedback, but also it's somehow the mechanism to be the moderator, national steering committee members, and the hub coordinators. So I have some moderator and facilitator role at my national country level. And also I think that learning by doing, sharing our experience, peer learning, it's instruments we are using to improve the mobilization, and also the generate some participation of hub members, and give the countries to have some ownership. Somehow they have ownership about the implementing activities. It's briefly what I can answer about this.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadia. And we'll get into this participation aspect very soon. But before, I would like to ask Raul as well on what have been the mechanisms in order to capture the demand, in order to capture the needs from the country into this process. And maybe I will make also that question extensive to the rest. If you could give us some examples of the kind of topics, the kind of demands that you found emerge from those consultations. And just before I give the words to Raul, I would like to mention something that maybe the public is not aware. especially from our regional grants, which we made a call last year and we just started with them. Those grants on education and innovation research started from a consultation process. So we make calls based on the demands and the needs and the topics that we were able to capture from the country. So Raul, if you can elaborate a little bit on the question, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to the IDRC and GPE specifically, and of course, all country partners that make KICS possible. Thanks for the organization of this panel, Florencio. Just to contextualize a little bit our work in the KICS LAC Hub, I work in SUMA, is the Laboratory of Education, Research and Innovation in Latin America and the Caribbean, to promote the right to education. So we make research and mobilize evidence to implement innovation, to scaling them up, to produce positive impacts. And we work together with some partners in the Caribbean, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. We're really glad to be the regional learning partner together with you and the GPE in this initiative. Just to say, it's important as a starting point to mention that we are working with educational leaders in every country, researchers, deans of universities in the region, officers and public servants from ministries of education, and of course, all they know better than anyone which are the national challenges and priorities. So that brings me to the question. In our theory of change in the hub, we have our first pillar, setting the policy agenda. The second one is now mobilizing knowledge, and the third one is supporting capacity building. In relationship with setting the policy agenda, we are discussing from the beginning with the countries, with the IDRC, with KICS, which are the main challenges and priorities of the countries, and represented by their appointed leaders, educational leaders. So we're not starting from tabula rasa or clean state. There is evidence and knowledge, previous evidence and knowledge. There are diagnoses. The countries have been working not within the countries with researchers, but also with the international organizations that are supporting and contributing the educational development. So we started from there. We have done revision of secondary data, research, documents, but also we have done some primary data collection from the beginning. We have done interviews with the country representatives, surveys with them, and we have actually a regular and permanent dialogue and conversation with all of them. We have set a few priorities in the hub. The first one has been related to teacher professional development. The second one, of course, with the impacts of the COVID and the pandemic in our systems, and there is a broad range of issues there and topics, and the strengthening of public educational system. That's another important issue. The transversal one would be working on inclusive education. It's an agenda that is within the region, and of course all the groups have been disadvantaged. The students specifically have been. We are addressing all the challenges and how to respond. So basically, I would start with that. We have a permanent and regular dialogue with the countries, with the representatives, with their authorities, with the stakeholders, and of course, and other institutions as well that are working within the countries.
Thank you, Raul. Before we go to the next round of questions, I would like to mention to those that are watching us through the platform that you can submit questions, and that we will try to respond as many as possible at the end of this session. So please go to the chat, write your questions. We will receive those and transfer those to our panelists. So what I would like to hear now, and this is the context. We started that initiative and this effort at the very same time that COVID pandemic started. So most of our plans in terms of meeting people, traveling to countries, bringing people together, bringing together officials of different countries and representatives in large events, well, those didn't happen. And we had to change both the methodologies in which we organized our work, but also partly the content of our work as a result of this pandemic that will certainly have a major impact in education. I would like to ask you if you can provide us some more specific examples. What are the kind of things that you hear from countries in terms of what do they need? What are the topics which there is a gap in knowledge, there is a gap in evidence, or they feel that we can help, or perhaps can help in order to provide evidence and knowledge that will inform the public policies. Some of the specific examples and how maybe those change due to COVID. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Victoria?
Thank you very much, Florencio, for that. I will begin with the Africa 19 Hub. Of course, our hub is inclined along 6 thematic areas, which include teaching and learning and learning assessments, early childhood education, equity, gender, and also meeting the data challenge for EMIS. So when we did our rapid assessment, we prioritized, we picked information from the focal points within the 19 countries. We're able now to prioritize specific themes where they wanted us to start focusing on. But even then, within those specific themes, we had sort of like layers of focus, and which were tagged around system strengthening, around capacity development, and also around a training regarding research. And then last was about a facilitation of exchange, information exchange, and also experiential learning. So for the topmost priority from our countries and from the feedback that we received from the Ministries of Education, and when I talk about we, I'm talking about the consortium partners, that is UNESCO ICBA, where I come from, then UNICEF, the region office for ISARO, and then the African Union. So teaching and learning came at the top, as in one theme where our countries needed a lot of focus, and more so around generating evidence-based policies, and then implementing those very policies at national level. And then within teaching and learning, we realized that there were sub-components in there. And one of the top priorities was about like competency-based curriculum development, so which were standing out. So you would find that within a main theme, there are also other sub-themes that we had now to focus on, which have led us to different sections and layers of capacity development for the different institutions. Now, the aspect of learning assessment also stood out so strongly, especially within the context of COVID-19, where countries were like, there was a big shift within the teaching and learning process. It was now more of online-based teaching and learning. And then the big question was like, how do we handle learning assessments in such a context? So then we had also to come up with a webinar that had now to address such a challenge. And then the other aspect that was also linked to learning assessment was the issue of meeting the data challenge, which is managed by our consortium partner African Union. So we had to do a community of practice, bringing experts to help and guide countries on how best to strengthen their data or EMIS systems within, again, the context of COVID-19. But then we also had other emerging issues that came in as a result of the assessment and especially around now the ECE, early childhood education. It also stood out. And so it has been kind of like different themes coming through, and we've been able to tackle one at a time. But even as we tackle that, you realize that more needs emerge from the member states as they continue learning from each other, especially around strengthening systemic challenges and maybe like generation of research, developing evidence-based policy, and other aspects like that. So that's what probably I could share from the KICS Africa 19 Hub. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. Natia, would you like to go next?
Yes, yes, with pleasure. And in June 2020, KICSIAB Hub conducting the empirical study on thematic priorities in the KICSIAB countries. As you know, it covers 21 countries. And this study guides the thematic focuses, focus on the KICSIAB activities, such as webinars or learning cycles, and also the focus of the regional KICS research grants. And as a national coordinator, as I already mentioned, every quarter, with the support of the National Steering Committee, I produce quarterly reports. It's a quarterly reports on progress, challenges, and priorities for the upcoming quarter. So what kind of priorities we have that this research and also our progress reports shows that priorities identified in the regional thematic study remains valid. And these are curriculum implementation and the links with teaching, pedagogy. Am I right to pronounce this word? And the learning assessment. Education policy planning and the use data evidence improved policy outcomes, and also education quality and equity. And also we have some priorities about the equity with the disruption of the COVID-19. So it's somehow the priorities which was identified.
Thank you. Thank you very much. They remind me to clarify how you submit questions. On top of the above the video player, you will see an icon of a person raising their hand. When you click there, you will have a dialog box appearing, and that will ask you to submit your email address and the question. And this is how we are going to receive it. So just click on the person raising the hand on top of the video of the video box. Raul, would you like to share with us some concrete examples of topics and areas that emerged from those consultations on what are the needs for evidence and research informing policies?
Sure, Florencio. I would like to start mentioning the many challenges that the pandemic has imposed in the systems, and not only in the system, but also in the KICS as a whole initiative that initially contemplated different in-person events and conferences for exchanging knowledge and innovations. So everything that now is virtual or is been virtual in these days. Of course, there are some pros, and I would say there are many pros on that. There are some cons, for sure, but there are many pros, and of course there are many opportunities for exchange and learning. For instance, bringing experts is much easier these days. So that's a good point. Every expert, the specialists are willing to participate in an initiative like this one to respond precisely to the demands and needs of the country. So that's a really pro. And the cons, of course, would be that there are many virtual competing events, meetings at the same time. So we're managing that in terms of the rhythm of the activities. But we're using different strategies to address the needs and demands of the countries. We are basically starting from individual meetings, like every week, every 2 weeks, we are in contact with the country representatives because we want to know them. We know they are the leaders, they are protagonists, and we really want to share their experiences, what they are doing in the countries. We start as a principle recognizing the strength and the good practices that are happening in all of the countries. We know they face challenges and that we all know, but we think that it's really important to start from the strength. So that's important. For that, it's important to know what they are doing. We have people from the public libraries. We have people from different organizations working with educational communities. So in that sense, we are aligning efforts, and that's the second part in terms of how we respond to this. Of course, it's in collaboration and partnership with other institutions. As I mentioned, our main partners in this endeavor is OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, who has been working in the region previously and know really well the players, stakeholders there. But also we have been articulating with others like UNESCO, CARICOM, and institutions within the country. So that would be an important effort to foster articulation among the different initiatives. So we put the experts working in teacher professional development, in service, pre-service, or the other ones, and we really want to provide answers, solutions, alternatives for the countries. I would say that.
Thank you, Raul. You mentioned something, and I would like to hear from the rest of the panel. You mentioned that in terms of mobilizing knowledge, in terms of generating opportunities to learn and to share knowledge, which is probably the biggest or the largest mandate for the hubs. COVID presented a very unique situation in which you have pros and cons, you have opportunities and you have challenges. And certainly having the possibility of bringing people into those conversations that otherwise will not necessarily travel or spend 5 days on the road to participate in a 2-hour event is certainly a challenge. Victoria, you work in a region in which you have to experiment some extra challenges that are related to the ability from those countries and participants to just join sometimes an online event, for instance, or to, and I wonder, how do you do it? What is the balance between this sort of world of opportunity that open up through online knowledge sharing and the actual restrictions or the reality in which those partners that you work with have to deal on a daily basis? And I'm specifically curious on how you deal with that, not only through Kids Hub, which is the subject of this meeting, but more broadly in the work that you at UNESCO, at UNICEF, at the African Union do. I mean, we understand that this is part of a larger effort, and I am sure that the kind of challenges that you are facing with the hubs are not that different from the challenges you are facing from other initiatives. So how do you do that in real life? What works, what doesn't? How do you manage those things? Do you load the expectation bar or something?
Thank you so much, Florencio. It's quite amazing that the advent of COVID-19 shifted things around in a very amazing way, especially for the continent and for the East African region and the Africa 19 hub. So we had to have a big shift to resort to using online digital platforms for communication. And then it's like a combination of tools all the time, because not one particular tool works for us. And internet connectivity has been a challenge for most of our participants, and especially for some countries, that once you start the webinar, the meeting, or the community of practice, people keep on dropping off. So then we had to do sort of like an assessment, an ICT infrastructure assessment. What tools do you prefer that we can use? And people are so comfortable to use WhatsApp, social media. So we ended up even creating a social media group using WhatsApp to be able to continue our discussion when everything fails. And then we also had to use other different platforms that can engage dialogue, where people can even come back to that platform after the connectivity has failed and continue with the discussion. Like we use different tools like Copano. We also use the Jumbo board and others to make sure that even after our 1 hour or 1 hour and 30 minutes, people can still have dialogue. And then we've heard that the Ministry of Education officers have ended up even inviting in other colleagues to join. And then for each of the sessions that we hold via Zoom or Teams, we have to record it because it has to be shared for those that dropped out of the call. So it has been a bit of a challenge. And then we find that the COVID-19 hit everybody in the region. So the minister, the officials from the Ministry of Education also had to deal with this overwhelming demands of being online. Everything is online. So sometimes you invite them for your meetings. There are all these competing agendas, then they have to sort out whether to join you or not. And so we encourage them like to nominate who else can be able to join this meeting beyond you, the focal point. So we've ended up having like a whole extension of people to work with at the national level to be able to join our meetings. And then, of course, with too many meetings, there has been fatigue that has stepped in. Like fatigue for being online all the time, but then how do you make your meetings or your webinars or exchange very interesting? So we use a lot of interactive tools to keep the momentum and for them to continue engaging with us. And also, we also encourage a lot of peer learning and bring in experts. You know, each time you have to really think through carefully how to make sure that you maintain the 40 or 50 people who are joining online for that call to stay online. So those are some of the things that we are trying to use to make sure that we deal with all these hassles. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Natia, I would like to take you into a different into the next question, and it's less about the how and it's more about the who. We have said that the goal of the hub is to bring together and generate exchange within a community of practice, and basically a number of stakeholders of national education systems, so they can share knowledge, share concerns, share solutions, and so forth. Now, that is always a challenge. You know, we always aim for more participation than the one that we are really able to enhance. But on top of that, and this is the question, this is what I think that your perspective is very interesting. It's also about who do we engage on those conversations. A clear participants in those debates are country officials from ministries of education, for instance, and perhaps representatives from international multilateral agencies that play a role within the planning of the national education system within those countries. But how do you expand? But how do you expand that beyond those two type of factors, beyond the Ministry of Education and, let's say, UNICEF or UNESCO? How do you bring others, and who are those others that you would like to see? And I will ask that question to the rest of the panel as well in those conversations. How do you bring teacher unions? How do you bring universities? How do you bring practitioners? How do you bring other actors within this system, private sector maybe? Do you have any experience from your work in Georgia on how do you bring more and more diverse participants into those conversations?
Thank you, Florencio, for this question. I think I will try to answer this question. And first of all, I want to say thank you to the KICS App Hub, which used different kind of channels in the COVID pandemic period, such as postcards. You know, they deliver postcards, and I had the chance to mobilize and recruit some representatives from my country, and one of them was a parent of children with child with disability. And we have some unions, they are parents unions, and they are actively working on inclusive education issues. And sometimes maybe not only the researcher or representative of academic institutions, just the parents of the child with disabilities was very interesting to share the experience to others, how she started fighting the rights of his own child. And I recommend it to listen this postcard on the KICS app link, and I can send and share this link with the interesting participants, among the interesting participants who are interested to listen this podcast. And myself as a national coordinator, I think that sure, officials, government representatives played an important stakeholder role, and also academia, research institutions, but also civil society organizations, media representatives sometimes played the important role to share the experience, to share the information about the interesting and innovative instruments, and somehow the news is what's happening not only in the country, for example, in my country, but in the region and in other countries. So I think that in the COVID, myself, COVID gave me the opportunity to improve my digital skills. And I said thank you for this pandemic. But sure, there are some challenges, as Victoria mentioned, that we have some regions, mountains, where the internet access has some problems, and to deliver the everyday learning process stability, they have some problems and challenges. So there are some challenges and also some positive aspects to implement the activities in this project during the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Natia. I will go to you, Raul, but before I want to say that we are start receiving some questions, and please, I ask the public to submit their questions. Click on the person raising a hand on top of the video box, and that's how you submit questions, and we'll be leaving some amount of time at the end to respond and to elaborate on those questions. Raul, on the same topic, in Latin America, which I work closer and probably I know a bit better than other regions, I've seen human OECS doing some interesting work and working sort of in different at different levels. Large events, but also specific work within countries, bringing together maybe people from ministries of education, and also sometimes interacting with ministers of education, sometimes interacting with teachers. And also working with teachers' unions, which is sometimes a challenging, a tough group to work with, because you have to, of course, get into sometimes politics, internal politics between different groups of interest, and so forth. And also in the case of Latin America, you work with a cluster of countries that in some aspects act as one, which are 4 islands in the Eastern Caribbean. Can you tell us a little bit more on working on specific with specific groups, and what do you get out of it, and how do you actually ensure or try to make them be part of the conversation, especially those that don't feel invited or don't feel as entitled as others sometimes to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Florencio, for that summary. I think it's really accurate. Indeed, we have been working hard in building this learning community, where different perspectives are coming into. As you mentioned, an important group of representatives are presidents or vice presidents of teachers' unions, and we have been organizing specific events, workshops with them. For instance, we had one in past March with the teachers' unions representatives, and there is a really interesting conversation ongoing about their role on teacher professional development. That would be one example. But as you mentioned, we're working at different levels, and we recognize the importance of connecting the local with the national, the regional, and the global levels, because there are many efforts going on at the same time. And for that, I would like to highlight one initiative we took, and it's that we created an advisory board where different institutions are represented there. It's led by our institutions, by SUMA, the director of SUMA, the director of OECS, but also well-known specialists as Michael Fullan, for instance, or Emiliana Vegas from Brookings Institution. So we have different kind of experts as well that are providing with their experience guidance to how to better respond to these subgroups of countries. We have countries are English speakers, or other ones are Spanish speakers, and also French. So this diversity as well produce the opportunity for exchange, but at the same time for specializing in subgroups that share some commonalities as well. So yes, I would say that in the hub started initially with 36 representatives, but there are many other audiences that we're working with. We're involving people from the organizations where the country representatives work. For instance, these days we are doing a pertinent research considering our adaptive management perspective. We are implementing currently a regional survey to highlight the voices of teachers in the region. Even if it's voluntary, until today we have more than 150,000 teachers have already responded in the region. Many of them are from our KICS countries. This is an initiative with SUMA, with OECS, working in the whole region. So that's really meaningful to engage with local and national needs. We're working with the technical teams within the Ministries of Education. So that's another example of how we can continue engaging with the countries. You're mute. The classic word.
You are mute, the most repeated word in those times. Victoria, we'd like to reflect a little bit on that. And I'm curious because you, as UNESCO, have those dialogues in a more permanent basis. This is not something that started with KICS or with the hubs. And you have experience on what is possible and what is not possible, even before COVID, of course, in terms of bringing new actors into that debate, and why is that necessary? If you could share with us some reflections. You are mute.
Yeah, from UNESCO's experience, we are probably privileged that we've always engaged with the countries even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And luckily for even the consortium partners, UNICEF, SRO, and African Union, they're on a day-to-day basis, like in touch with the country focal points and the ministries of education. And the networks are already there, and we didn't find a lot of difficulty, like for us, engaging with the countries because of the structures that are already in place. And also we were lucky that we have a roster of experts. So when you look at the KICS Africa 19 hub, we have the regional advisory team, we have the technical experts within the region on the 6 thematic areas that I mentioned. And then it was like easy for us for people to run to if they need any information, or if we need experts to come and intervene here and there regarding the strengthening and the knowledge sharing and improving the engagements within the country level. But as I mentioned, that when you look at the different 6 things that we have for each country, they are also broad in the nature that one focal point cannot be the only expert in all the 6 areas. So we've ended up having subgroups for each of the 6 thematic areas at country level, and it almost looks like the hub is expanding its tentacles within the country because of the different subgroups within each of the thematic areas and the experts. So we are ending up like having almost like more focused dialogue and more engagement around a specific thematic area, and then we are building a community of practice for experts and all these people within that particular thematic area. And then the other beauty is that we are also working with the regional economic commissions within the Africa region, who have got education focal points, who are also helping to drive the agenda at the national level. And in fact, we are soon having like a high-level dialogue with the African Union, especially around the issue of meeting the data challenge and how the regional economic commissions can be able to come in and intervene and support countries. Can we have some kind of regional frameworks? Can we have some kind of standardized way of doing things along the different thematic areas? So it's quite an interesting maze, and we are so excited that we are not only learning from the KICS Africa 19, but also our sister hub, the KICS Africa 21 hub. So we keep on like, meeting and interfacing and discussing how best can we complement each other within, because we are working in the same region, So it's quite an amazing dialogue I could share right now. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have sister hubs and you have cousin hubs. The ones maybe in India and Latin America.
Yeah.
Okay, I will start with some questions from the public. We have quite a few already, and we have about 15, 20 minutes to go. There is a question on, okay, let me see here. Okay, we see quite a few KICS Hub events. How do you help make sure the knowledge sharing is useful in policy dialogues within your member countries? What results are you seeing? So I guess the question is that, okay, we do a lot. Now, how do we ensure that what we do is useful? What have you learned about usefulness of those different activities? If you could share some reflections on that, and then we'll move to the next question. I don't know who wants to start. I don't want to. Or I may impose. Katia, you want to start?
Yeah, I can't say about the results nowadays, but I can share information that it was a very high engagement of the interest from my country to participate in the learning cycles, and more than 5 teams participated in one learning cycle, and I think that this high interest and motivation to participate in the learning cycles at the KICS hub organized events is somehow show that these events are very interesting. It's example of from my country and from my own experience. And I say the results will come in the long term and from the sustainability, and we will see the nearest future. Because they, this above mentioned 5 teams work in different themes. It was inclusive education, data, etc. So I think that their results will come will come in the nearest future, and we will see.
Raul or Victoria, would you like to add something?
Yeah, this is Victoria. Can I say something?
Please.
Okay, so we recently held a community of practice learning session on competency-based curriculum development. And when our stakeholders come into this community of practice event, countries at different levels, some are doing very well, others have come in to learn, others have already come up with a policy, but they're struggling in terms of how to even implement it. So after the community of practice on the realities of competence-based education, a ministry official from one of the countries, let me say, this was Lesotho, reached out to the secretariat requesting for national level support beyond what they had learned from the community of practice event, and seeking out to us in terms of how best they can be helped to improve their competence-based curriculum and education processes at national level. So now the hub was reached out to source out experts that can now help the country itself to improve their own programs based on what they had learned. And then also last year, we had a very interesting one where countries were grappling with the reopening of schools. And we had to, the first country within our region was Botswana, which was even outside of the hub to open their schools. So we had to invite them to come and speak to the KICS Africa 19 countries. How did they go about it? What guidelines? What are the things to look out for? What are some of these challenges? And because everybody was like worried, how do we start? How do we do this? How do we approach this? When the Botswana director for basic education presented, everybody was like, there are so many questions. And then they picked a lot of leaves in terms of how to go about school reopening for the first time. So Uganda was able to finalize their guidelines for school reopening, and others learned from there, and they were able to implement. So everybody learned something from these events because they are at different levels in terms of their needs. That's what I can give many examples, but for now, let me share that.
But that's very helpful, and I will then elaborate a little bit on that. But I don't know, Raul, we have a few questions coming in now, so I have others, and actually Victoria opens segue to some of those. But would you like to add something on this before we move into the next question?
Yeah, maybe just briefly mention something that I didn't mention before, which are the country roundtables. We are discussing within the countries as well, with different perspectives coming from the different institutions that participate in the countries. And I would say that those discussions are based on national research done specifically from KICS, but are informing other processes, such as the education sector analysis and the elaboration of sector plans. So that I would put that as an example of how we are articulating efforts that are beyond KICS and are, of course, contributing to the same systems.
Thank you. I would like to go back, because we have a question here on patterns that you see in terms of what countries want to learn from each other, and if there is this inter-country learning limited to member countries of the hub. And just a reminder for the public, GPE KICS works with countries that are members of GPE, which are 70. Not all of the countries in any of those regions are members of KICS. And the question, I guess, is, do you see a value on expanding those knowledge sharing activities beyond the boundaries of the 70 plus countries that are currently part of GPE and KICS? You mentioned the case of Botswana, in Victoria, and the same question applies for other regions. Is there a reason why Honduras and Nicaragua, that are members of KICS, cannot learn from Costa Rica, which is right beside, and have a ton of interaction on a regular basis? What are your views on that? How do you expand, or do you see any value of expanding the knowledge sharing activities? The knowledge has some boundaries, basically, and I wonder, how do you see that?
May I go? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because as you know, we are putting focus. The efforts are on the countries, the KICS-LAC countries. But at the same time, from the beginning, we planned the possibility of exchange, learning visits to other countries that are not part of the KICS. So that's one thing, like internships to know exactly what is happening in terms of data use, for instance, data production or systems would be interesting. And it will happen from the next year, hopefully, if the pandemic allows it. But that's one thing. And then as I mentioned, we have like more closed events, but at the same time we have like open ones, and we're doing some partnering events as well. I would like to highlight the most important. We have been partnering these days. It is related to the GEM report, the Global Education Monitoring Report. Where SUMA work directly close with UNESCO in the elaboration of the report for the region, and there are studies of more than 20 countries, and we're sharing what's happening there, informing policy formulation, identifying common challenges, and of course it's not only about the KICS countries, it's about the whole region, and even if we're working with some islands that are partners from the OECS, our Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, at the same time they belong to a bigger community, which is the CARICOM community or the OECS community as well. So we are learning from others, we're exchanging with others too, and that's definitely the idea. And of course, one more thing would be to learn from what is happening in Africa 19, what is happening in those countries. I think it's something that for sure will be really rich as well for our development.
Natia, I don't know if you have any comments on these, but I would like to start the next question with you. And the question from the public is that looking into the future and considering the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you think, and what do you think the needs of the countries will be, and how that will influence the knowledge agenda of the hub? So how is it going, COVID, to change the knowledge agenda, the things that the countries and partners need to know and need to receive from us in terms of evidence, in terms of practice?
Okay. In my perspective, I think that COVID pandemic show us that the digital skills, it's very important, and we have to improve digital skills of our teachers, researchers, and also I think that accessibility of the education, accessibility of the internet, it's also somehow the challengeable, and when we have to think about to develop the future activities and design the policy for the education at the national level. What about the international level, all the inter-country sharing knowledge and innovations? I think that nowadays we have the only way to share it in the online, but I think that it should be possible to do it in the offline too. We'll see.
Thank you. Victoria, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Florencio. From what we have learned so far, that our KICS Africa 19 Hub has become a point of reference in terms of expertise. So, and for the different communities of practices and learning events, webinars, name it, whatever we've held with our countries, it's like they constantly refer to us like, do you have someone who can help on this, someone who can guide on this? And so we are also increasingly getting a request that we want to scale this down more at the national level, because there are many stakeholders, local education groups, and other stakeholders that need to be engaged in the KICS Hub beyond the regional events. So it's like almost like the regional events, yes, they are good, but they're almost like limited, because now countries are asking for individualized support on specific items, and then they are asking the hub to support them in getting experts and convening some of these knowledge sharing experiences at the national level. So we are getting these requests and we are trying to experiment it out to support the countries. And also we are building a roster of thematic experts who can be able to help us in terms of reaching out to the countries within the specific needs. But having said that, there are also many other emerging issues that are rising in terms of things that we never anticipated, like for the continent and especially for our region, issues around emergency preparedness and response, things around like how do we facilitate learning experiences for offline classrooms in the context of COVID-19, and then several other things that are coming up, issues of governance and leadership. There are a lot of things that are coming up. So we need to really think through how best the hub can be repositioned to address some of these challenges. Yeah.
Raul, some quick remarks.
Yeah, briefly. I would say that we recognize that not only the world is changing, but also educational systems and teaching and learning probably is changing from now onwards more than ever. And we have been discussing that, and there's a huge opportunity for innovators. We support. We're looking for innovations that have been effective to share, to be contextualized in other latitudes as well, countries. As you mentioned initially, initially the hubs are more in the exchange dimension, but at the same time we're highlighting these days the production of knowledge that could be useful for the countries, and for that I just mentioned the survey we are implementing these days, where the teachers are presenting their perceptions, their practices, their challenges of distance education or hybrid models that are happening in the countries that are so different from one place to another. So we are learning as well. There is a learning moment to respond to the next month and years.
And if I may add as well to that, I think that I can imagine, or I know maybe, that also the educational landscape in which you work changed dramatically, not only because, okay, there is COVID and then there are those schools and so forth, but also because in one hand, you have learning gains that were made throughout the last decade that will be affected as a result of school closures. And in the other hand, you have budgets for education that are shrinking as a result of economic crises that are related with the pandemic. So I can imagine that you will be facing an environment in which not only you have new and more acute demands that are due to COVID, but also a landscape in which it's harder to work because the starting point is lower and the resources you have to do it are less. Am I correct with that assumption?
Yes, you're correct, and as Victoria was mentioning, we are now working as well in identifying possible responses, alternatives from the different situations that country are facing. So definitely, it's been challenging, will be challenging, but we are putting our best from the teams. We have like an executive team within SUMA and OECS, and I would like to congratulate the team for the big efforts we're doing on that.
Okay. Look, we are coming to the end of our session. We have 1.5 minutes left. I don't know if you have any quick remarks you would like to make real quick before we are out of the room. Victoria?
Yes, thank you very much. From the KICS Africa 19 Hub, we really want to thank you so much, IDRC, for organizing this forum, and for GPE, and for the funding that we've been given. It's going a long way to help the countries, I have to say, and they will never be the same. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for the funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Natia?
Once again, thank you very much. to you to give me a chance to participate in this panel. And also I want to thank you, KICS Hub, which gave me the opportunity to work at the national level and help them to mobilize and implement the activities in Georgia, in my country. So thank you very much once again, and I hope that I answered all questions which was question in this panel. Thank you.
The same here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Just one reflection at the end is that we are trying to reflect and think not only in what works, which is something that we all do, but also how to implement, how to scale, and in the how, the part of how to work with the country, how to translate what we know that works, it's like, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if I may add to that, I also not to be afraid of talking about what doesn't work. I think that we learn also by looking at what didn't work.
Definitely.
Well, thank you, all of you. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Raul. Thank you, Julie, that joined us. And thank you very much to all who participated in that event as public. Unfortunately, we couldn't cover all the questions you asked, but we tried as much as we could. So thank you very much. I understand that this event will be recorded and posted online in our website sometime soon. So thank you very much. Have a great